Welcome, welcome. We've got a lovely topic today. Truth of secret societies and hidden light workers. What a fun topic. This one's one of my favorite topics. One of the most interesting things about duality is this the story that plays out of light and dark. And so today we're going to focus on a question that came in from one of the community members. So if you have questions about anything of any metaphysical or spiritual intrigue, and you want to talk about it on the channel in a stream like this, send an email to seanthehero1111@gmail.com and just, let me know what you want to talk about. And so in this case, Alistar sent, he's curious. He said, if you're interested, I'm curious what you think on this kind of service. This woman claims to be a part of a secret group, except their service is for seemingly benevolent reasons. And so what he's talking about is a woman that went by the code name of Black Widow in an organization called TLS. And, normally I wouldn't actually talk about the names of the organizations, but that's the particular one that Alistair's asking about. So that's the one that I guess we'll use as an example. If you're interested in that information on that, check out Jason Shurka, I think is his name, Shurka, I believe is the name. And he's doing this sort of disclosure series that he's working on with this organization that has given the name TLS, which stands for the Light System. So it's essentially a hidden light society or group. And it says, the TLS branch says they do defensive actions from disturbing cults. Maybe they keep them in line. The people they use seem to be fairly lovely, people like this woman. Positives don't intervene like this, do they? Secretly nudging events towards certain goals. That seems sort of like control. It still seems like control to me. Benevolent service to self? Question mark. So that's really where we're going to start. And I just wanted to say that what we're talking about here is metaphysically. We're talking about the consciousness. We're observing consciousness, attempting to have no real opinion on the matter from at this perspective where we're talking about it. I'm not going to really go into my opinions on these different things, or at least I'll probably try not to. What I want to try to highlight is what consciousness is doing while it's experiencing itself. Like what is happening, right? What the bigger picture is, I guess, is what I'm trying to talk about. So part of this, people can have some very heartfelt and emotional connections to the things that these forces are doing, right? Whether they're really for this sort of light force that's trying to accomplish things, or they're very against the dark force, or whatever it is. There's a lot of emotional stuff that can come up from that. And so I wanted to just start by saying I totally recognize that and appreciate that, and I have compassion for all of these things as well. But what we're attempting to do is take a lens that's a step higher, and we're trying to observe consciousness and understand the metaphysics sort of what's happening, and get the truth of the matter of what's going on this planet. And not just this planet, but also in the universe at large in different places. This is happening in different ways. So first, I guess we'll talk about, and if you have any questions or anything interesting to bring up, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I'll try to get to it after I go through some of this stuff. I also have some things that I'm going to read that are from the Law of One that talk about this concept, which is primarily establishing, it's we could call it a thought battle. It's a thought war that's occurring. It's some people call it a spiritual war, but I don't really like that term because spirituality to me is pure. So pureness couldn't have war, to my mind. So I like to call it a thought war, a thought battle, is how I would refer to that. That's why these forces show up. And the forces tend to show up in generally two types primarily. And when I say type, I'm referring to where their impetus is coming from. So generally it's coming from two different types of sources. One is either a galactic brothers, sisters, friends that are helping to inspire action in third density, or it's coming from the inner planes of the earth, ascended masters, or other, a lot of these societies or secret groups have their masters pass away or ascend essentially, but stay here in fourth density. They're not seen in their physical bodies, but they stay here as guides and still guide their organization, you could say. They're, as a, and that goes forward. So you could see that there's some entities that need, if on the positive side, they're working through the council and receiving and using council approval to work with humans at different layers. The inner earth planes don't go through any council approval because they're considered to be part of the collective consciousness itself. So they're a part of the free will of that sphere. They can do and say what they want. There's no council to approve their sovereign will, right? That's how you could see that. Whereas the galactic entities that are sort of outside of this sphere are, they're generally going through the council to obtain permission. Unless they're negatively oriented, they're trying to ignore all of that, which is challenging for them. It's a task for them to actually get through. There's a web that's over the sphere that prohibits entities from entering. However, in that web, there's also holes that get formed and entities can get through. And that's how the influence sort of begins. In order for free will not to be stopped, basically the negative forces have to have an opportunity. If they desire opportunity must form somehow, right? So despite the positive polarities attempt to veil it and to protect it, there's got to be cracks in that somehow. Because that attempt itself also is an attempt of defense, which can't, when we try to defend, we're always going to have entropy in that somehow. And that's why that shield has little holes that pop up in it. And the guardians kind of manage that shield. But they tend to have those two directives in either positive or negative, right? So you do ascend. Just because you're negative, people think that negative can't ascend. Negative can ascend. Genghis Khan is a good example, ascending into fourth density negative. Or Rasputin is another one. Those are in the Law of One, if you want to look up the information about those. And it's sort of in fourth density negative, they're exploring love of self. In disregarding other self, or other self is seen as a tool, something a pawn, something like that. And then after that, they tend to fall into perhaps three. If we want to give them categories, we could say three categories, but really it's a spectrum depending on the purity of the leadership, you could say, of that group. So the leadership, depending on how much human distortion they're adding or how much karmic distortion they're adding to then what the activities get into. But they tend to be either like light, a gray, or dark. And so, we hear about like white hats and gray hats and black hats and stuff. It's sort of like that, I guess. But The light essentially operates under the rule, the overall rule is that free will is not to be abridged in any way that they can really prevent. Sometimes missteps occur where they abridge free will accidentally. Sometimes because of an overabundance of compassion, they abridge free will. They step in or intervene in something, that type of thing. But typically at that level, it's being done here from fourth density. Positive forces are using human instruments to accomplish what is perceived to be as the divine plan of positivity. That's what they're trying to do. And they do that with the will of the human participants. It's not a secret. Like, you have to open to these forces. You have to request these things. It gets offered to you from, usually tests start to come about, and then you establish contact, and then you end up agreeing to how you want to serve, which is what I do. One of the things I do. So I'm part of this whole thing. Sean, the being, is an instrument of this whole thing. You could say, but I'm not involved in any battle, weird things like that. I'm giving my effort through these things, which is I'm trying to balance polarity, to neutralize polarity, is part of my duty, I guess. So in that expression, I'm trying to not, I'm trying to get as much positive polarity as possible by serving others without any intention of outcome or like expectation of anything, trying to just purely give as best I can. And this is just one of the ways I do it. But in this way, that's something that's kind of clearly light. It's just somebody trying to share truth as they have seen it, their experience, and it's honest and authentic. They're not trying to gain anything, right? Lots of people do this already. And I'm not special for that or anything, but that's just what a sort of a purity of service looks like. And it could easily be said that, no, I'm trying to do this to make a name for myself or something like that too, right? That is like actually the last kind of thing I want, to be honest. That's kind of like a nightmare for me, I think. So I don't have those types of aspirations or anything like that to make Sean into something here, or whatever. And that's how we know that service is pure in this type of area. So the light forces then use human instruments, and the human instruments are distorted generally. So they have opinions, they have thoughts, they don't understand, and they're not going to be given all of the information, because giving them all of the information would abridge their free will. Basically, they're given what they can understand as operatives. So actually, in that TLS, there's one of their members is named Ray, codenamed Ray, and Ray has very clear opinions that we should use violence sometimes, for example, like that sometimes we should just step in with violence. So that would be an abridging of the free will of the entities involved. In this case, we're trying as a collective to step away from using violence to make change, and so the vibration isn't really in alignment with that type of behavior, and that's what the TLS leadership is feeling and knowing through their guidance from the fourth density being that's guiding, or it could be fifth density being that's guiding. But the fifth density doesn't see the need for conflict anymore. So the thought battle is happening between fourth density beings, fourth density positive and fourth density negative, which I think I got a quote, part of that from the Law of One that we'll go into in a minute, to get more in depth with that. And so the gray is like a spectrum in between that, where in the name of righteousness that they believe, they'll do things that are not necessarily peaceful, but perhaps things that they believe are the right thing to do for everyone. So that's where that light aspect of the gray is that this is for the best of humanity. Whether it's like pure or peaceful is not really necessarily a bad, it doesn't necessarily have to be peaceful, as long as it is in the name of the best. It's sort of like the idea of as long as we achieve the outcome by whatever means necessary. That's what the phrase was I was looking for. Whatever means necessary. You know, so this is more of a a little distorted, like not sure exactly which way. They haven't quite chosen, you know, positive path or negative path. They're kind of dabbling in both. And generally in the name of what they believe is righteous. And that's usually where the divestment happens, is when they realize they don't know what's righteous. Oh, we thought we knew what was best from our minds, but we didn't, you know? That's usually what happens in there. And then the dark is just basically the tasks and things that are done are to gain power and control. The more that free will can be manipulated, the better. Basically, the more polarity is gained from that. The more, but there's sort of limits that happen as well. So like, if you try to manipulate someone too much, they might fight back and you fail because they defend it. If they successfully defend the manipulation, then you lose in your power as a negative entity. You lose in your polarity. You're depleted. And so you have to like usually regain, revitalize. This is why like in dynamics between humans, the same concept applies. When one's trying to control the other, and then the other one finally, after years, just stands up and takes over, the other person usually will often respond in like a very emotional way, sad, hurt. Like they'll start to feel like, oh, I wasn't able to manipulate them. And they might even like get ridiculous, like very weak, right? And desperate in response to what's happening. Now, this is just a potential. It doesn't always happen this way, of course. But, you know, like sometimes they can use that shame they're feeling for failing at manipulating and turn that into like a rage or something. So it can get wacky. But the point is that the negative entity, when they fail the manipulation, they lose polarity. But when they succeed, they gain. And so the positive is sort of the opposite. When they serve without abridging free will, they gain polarity. When they serve abridging free will, they lose it. The more they abridge free will, the more they intervene on a sovereign being's path, the more polarity is lost in fourth density and above. This doesn't begin until fourth density. This back and forth of polarity gaining doesn't begin until one chooses between which way they're going in service. Ultimately, it's sort of like this, like it goes like this. You're in the choice, then you pick and you go either the right, which is light, or you go to the left, which is dark. But then you go like this and come back in sixth density. So between here and here, there is still perception of like differences or like battle a little bit. In fourth density, the beings still see like, oh, I'm gonna take and do that, and oh, I have to correct this, and that all that stuff still exists. And so we're in fourth density now in the earth, and not all humans are sitting in fourth density consciousness, but quite many are, and calibrating, learning how to see the world from the heart properly, basically. And that's kind of what we talk about here, is trying to see through the eyes of peace a lot of the time, right? Trying to see through some of these illusions and stories that are playing. And so, many different ways these actually come about. And one of the more interesting ways, and because I've talked about me being a walk-in on the channel, I thought it would be interesting to talk about an experience that a walk-in had with one of these light forces. And so I'll just jump into that. This is session 35, question number 8. And the questioner asks, well, in that case, I would like to know the motivation for this use of Abraham Lincoln's body at the time. Ra. I am Ra. This shall be the last full query of this session, as we find the instrument quite low in vital energies. The one known as Abraham had an extreme difficulty in many ways and, due to physical, mental, and spiritual pain, was weary of life but without the orientation to self-destruction. In your time, 1853, this entity was contacted in sleep by a fourth density being. This being was concerned with the battle between forces of light and forces of darkness which have been waged in fourth density for many of your years. This entity accepted the honor duty of completing the one known as Abraham's karmic patterns, and the one known as Abraham discovered that this entity would attempt those things which the one known as Abraham desired to do but felt it could not. Thus the exchange was made. The entity Abraham was taken to a place of suspension until the cessation of its physical vehicle, much as though we of Ra would arrange with this instrument to remain in the vehicle, come out of the trance state, and function as this instrument, leaving this instrument's mind and spirit complex in its suspended state. The planetary energies at this time were at what seemed to this entity to be at a critical point, for that which you know as freedom had gained in acceptance as a possibility among many peoples. This entity saw the work done by those beginning the democratic concept of freedom, as you call it, in danger of being abridged or abrogated by the rising belief and the use of the principle of the enslavement of entities. This is a negative concept of a fairly serious nature in your density. This entity, therefore, went forward into what it saw as a battle for the light, for healing of a rupture in the concept of freedom. This entity did not gain or lose karma by these activities due to its detachment from any outcome. Its attitude throughout was one of service to others, more especially to the downtrodden or enslaved. The polarity of the individual was somewhat but not severely lessened by the cumulative feelings and thought forms which were created due to large numbers of entities leaving the physical plane due to trauma of battle. So that's just one example of how a fourth density being might come in a positive way to try and aid the planet. So in the cases of like something like TLS, yeah, and I'm not saying this is the case, but one of those entities or one of the leaders of it perhaps could be making these types of arrangements. That's just a one way that happens. Some are more, they're just still totally the same being. They're just connected to them in different ways. And if you listen to those disclosures, I'm sure they'll talk about like a whole bunch of stuff that will align with what I'm saying. I haven't watched them or anything really. I watched the one that Alistair sent, which was, I think, number 5, disclosure 5 or something. And I think I listened to a bit of the first one, but that's about it. That's how it works though, is that the human becomes an instrument of that positive oriented force. So it's sort of like the hand of the light forces, you could say. And so for me, my role is a messenger, essentially. So I'm more like a mailman type thing. So I'm just running around with letters and packages for people and making sure everyone gets the information, or at least like that's kind of how I see it. It's not even really like that, but it's just a way to look at it. So everyone has a different role, and so some of the people are like actual operatives that go do things, and physically or spiritually or a mixture. And most of the light ones are more on the spiritual side. Like, uh, they're more on that side of things. The more physical it gets, the more into the illusion it is. And this isn't to downgrade any of this work. It's just to express that some souls are like still very invested in the illusion, and then therefore are going to play the role that they've come to play, which might be some type of secret light work type operative thing, right? And you know, we'll all usually get contacted in some way by these entities at some point when we start to raise in vibration and accept that they exist, and we're open to discuss with them, and we're not afraid. Once we're in that sort of state, we can start to establish a relationship. And we don't have to do anything. Like, there's no, it's all like, you know, it's all just here's some information. What are we looking for to do with them, right? Despite what people think, there's not really currently that I'm aware of a plan for ships to come here, like physically unveil themselves. You know, it'd be pretty cool. But like, as far as I know, that's not currently like really in the works, because the general fact of it is that humanity isn't really ready for that. That's the general fact of it. And the forces that are negative will attack as well, right? To defend what they've, you know, so it would just cause chaos probably. That's the information I have, you know, and I'm not trying to say anyone's wrong for anything that they're channeling or seeing, or it's just what I've seen. I would love for them to come, trust me. Like, whenever I feel into that, I'm like, oh, there's a part of me that's like, just pick me up, right? But we'll have memories. We might have memories of like, oh, I think I've actually already been, and that's often the case. Most of us that are highly like entwined into these energies have probably already been contacted in sleep. It depends on the veiling, and as our Akash opens, we remember these things a bit, and we're like, oh yeah, I did meet a being in my dreams that asked, that asked if I wanted to participate in this. Oh yeah, I did do, right? It's different for all of us. So it shows up very different ways. It can show up as like angelic stuff. It can show up so many different ways. You know, I have people that have told me, like they have like mermaids that tell them things that they should do in their life in dreams, and then they go do those, you know, and it's all great, and you know. So in another thing is, at the higher level, it's a battle of thought, and that all filters down into the experience of the illusion to get played out, because thought becomes form, right? So you can imagine, and you know, actually, I'll just read what Ross says about it. It says about the thought battle that's occurring. You spoke of an Orion, this is session 25, question 5. You spoke of an Orion Confederation and a battle being fought between the Confederation and the Orion Confederation. Is it possible to convey any concept of how this battle was fought? I am Ra. Picture, if you will, your mind. Picture it then in total unity with all other minds of your society. You are then single-minded, and that which is a weak electrical charge in your physical illusion is now an enormously powerful machine whereby thoughts may be projected as things. In this endeavor, the Orion group charges or attacks the Confederation arms with light. The result, a standoff, as you would call it, both energies being somewhat depleted by this and needing to regroup. The negative depleted through failure to manipulate, the positive depleted through failure to accept that which is given. So that's a really important point at the end. Essentially, the failure to openly receive your brother or sister is like what is draining. It's draining to the positive entity to do that. And then it's draining to the negative entity to not be received in its force that it's pushing. And so it's just sort of like an ongoing cyclical stalemate, we could say. And that's one of the reasons that our experience here is like this. Like we kind of go through both. And then as we harmonize, the negative frequencies don't show up in our consciousness as much. So we become less susceptible to the negative thought frequencies that are falling into our sphere from this fourth density thought battle that's happening. And we become more attuned sort of to the positive frequencies. And that's what a result is of us making the choice of serving others or serving self. Like, what are we going to do? Either, like I was saying before, it all comes back into unity in the sixth density, where there's no such thing as, there's not a difference really. And so at sixth density, this would be considered the planetary drama. And it's somewhat not consequential to a sixth density perspective, because even if the planet were to destroy itself, all of the entities on it would just migrate to continue their evolution on another planet. Like, the souls are eternal. It wouldn't like die or be gone somehow. They would just go somewhere else, and they would carry that karma collectively with them and play that out in a new place. So at the sixth density perspective, it sounds like it's not compassionate. No, it is compassion. They are compassionate. That's why we have wanderers here from that density, because of compassion. It's a risk actually for the wanderer to get caught up in the illusion for a long time. To get caught up in cycles of like getting into karma, or like getting confused because they go through the veil and then they, hurt people or something, which is essentially what happened to me. I think I was saying before that I was in one of my past lives just fairly recently in the linear progression, I was a priest that wasn't like that great at being a priest. I wasn't evil or anything, but I just was like misusing my priestly authorities in different ways and teaching people wrong. And I didn't believe in what I was teaching because I saw through the deceptions, but I continued to lie and stuff like that. So it was like a bit of a nightmare. But we get caught up in this, and then that's why I'm, one of the reasons I'm back is to do this differently and to talk about God differently. To talk about God more authentically without all the dogma. So we go through these cycles as souls, and it's not uncommon for us to get caught up in like the illusion, and it's not actually bad if we're invested into the what we could call the drama of our world. That probably means we're supposed to be, unless it's causing us all this discomfort. Like if we feel like called to aid, for example, there's, I have a lot of friends, myself included, like I rescued my dog, and there's some people that are just like constantly trying to help these dogs. Like, that's amazing, right? So I don't want it to sound like I'm ever advocating like we just don't do anything about anything. Like, we're here, right? We're here. So we don't want to try to live this generally. We don't want to try to live that sixth density perspective here, even if we resonate with that as the truth. We tend to want to bring our understanding of unification and peace to our actual being and be that, which is going to help people generally, right? That's what I think most of us are going to be oriented to do if you're on this channel anyway. At least however we can figure to do that. And I talked the other day about how it's not so much about what you do, it's about who you are as you do it, right? What are you bringing? So we're all sort of that was the other point, is that we're all like sort of a part of the battle, you could say. Whether we are aware or not, we're a part of that. So even just somebody that's like a dancer, just like is like I don't know, a ballerina or something, that just loves what she's doing, putting on these beautiful shows. That's a positive like expression, creativity, inspiring. It's affecting planetary consciousness positively. She's doing it in front of people. It's great, you know. That type of thing that's the same. That's what a positive being does, is just radiates itself. And the more positive they become, the more, as we ascend into fifth density, in fifth density, we now can't perceive a threat to us at all. So there, and on the other side, the fifth density negative is so compacted and constricted in separation that it can't even understand that there's other things to, like, it wants to just figure out the best way it can increase its polarity and constrict on itself in its power. That's basically what it's doing. And then the fifth density positive is becoming wise enough to realize that it's completely unharmable by anything, and just starts radiating more and more and more like the sun. And eventually the negative side goes, shoot, I have to realize that I'm all to graduate. I have to realize that I'm everything to graduate, you know? And so it just ends up being the same thing. So then they graduate into sixth density, or the density of unity, or the density of the law of one. Yeah. Oh, and one more thing that I wanted to read was session 25, question 6. Could you amplify the meaning of what you said by failure to accept that which is given? I am Ra. At the level of time-space at which this takes place in the form of what you may call thought war, the most accepting and loving energy would be to so love those who wish to manipulate that those entities were surrounded, engulfed, and transformed by positive energies. This, however, being a battle of equals, the Confederation is aware that it cannot, on equal footing, allow itself to be manipulated in order to remain purely positive. For then, though pure, it would not be of any consequence, having been placed by the so-called powers of darkness under the heel, as you may say. It is thus that those who deal with this thought war must be defensive rather than accepting in order to preserve their usefulness and service to others. Thusly, they cannot accept fully what the Orion Confederation wishes to give, that being enslavement. Thusly, some polarity is lost due to this friction, and both sides, if you will, must then regroup. It's not been fruitful for either side. The only consequence which has been helpful is a balancing of the energies available to this planet, so that these energies have less necessity to be balanced in this space-time, thus lessening the chances of planetary annihilation. So, yeah. So basically, like I was saying, it's sort of like this just cycling that's happening. So I'm going to just jump into the chat now and start talking. Is that light being Abraham the one working through Esther Hicks? I just always wondered. Oh no, that was about Abraham Lincoln. That was about Abraham Lincoln. About how he had a walk-in experience. In that case, Abraham, or the soul of Abraham, the mind and spirit complex, sat in suspension until the body was done being used by the fourth density entity. All done in agreement. And the people around wouldn't have really noticed, because the being would have just inhabited all of the karmic stuff that Abraham had. So there wouldn't be a discernible difference, other than he probably just became suddenly very confident in what he was doing. So suddenly he's like, oh, I know what I'm doing. That would be the only real visible notice, probably. Especially with a fourth density being, because a fourth density being is closer to the third density vibration as well. So it's not as like wacky as like the experience that I had. It's a little less wacky. Yeah. I kind of want that to let us create harmony. 1-1 says, I kind of want that too. It's been a huge spiritual battle. I think you were talking about the them coming down and stuff. Yeah, that'd be fun. It'd be fun. I think I'm just curious. I think I just want to go for a ride in some ships and stuff, and you know. But I've kind of already had these experiences, but I haven't in this body. Like they're astral experiences. So part of me is still the skeptic. There still is a skeptic in me that's like, I'm not sure, I'm not sure, I'm not sure. Good afternoon, Dina. Ooh, is that TN Tennessee? I have been in Tennessee a lot. I've been all over the place in Tennessee. I've been to Gatlinburg and Nashville and a bunch of different places. I love that place. And E says maybe it doesn't even matter. I'm not sure which part we were talking about, but really it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter unless we feel it matters, right? Like it's sort of like it's interesting. It's interesting for me. Is I'm curious about these things. There's nothing to be afraid of. But these things are really interesting. Really, really interesting. Like if we look at what happens in the world and we start to consider that, oh, there's actually these beings that are kind of above doing this thought thing, and it's starting to make sense about like the gods telling people what to do in various mythos, like how long this has been going on, and right? It's very interesting. But it shouldn't be scary or anything. Like it's been going on since forever. Pretty much, right? Pretty much, like all the history we can fathom in our current society, this has been going on. So it's going on. It's going to continue to go on. So I find it interesting to explore it. But you're right that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know. Hi, Crescent Moonstar. Hello. Sarah says, I agree with that in the sense that the higher we vibrate, the more invisible we become to the negative entities. Yeah, basically. The only way they can truly evolve is humility and surrender to organic evolution. Yeah, we do basically become invisible. The cracks or the holes that we have in our aura is what attracts the parasitic type of entity. And so a negative entity is a parasitic type. It's going to try at various... Either it's one of the like worms, an astral worm that just collects the energy, which is a part of the cycle of light. It's kind of important that actually happens. Otherwise, you're just leaking energy into where and what. Like it has to return to creator. So creator gets it somehow. So a parasite comes, it's like a little worm, and it drains out of the hole. But as the holes go away, now we're not like perceived really as a target, if that makes sense. When we are not threatenable in any way, then we don't have any place that can be poked at, really. And so the negative entities just sort of can't. They don't bother because it would just. They try to push a hole into your aura, and they fail. They lose a lot of their polarity. And they're probably going to fail if they're even able to see you. They can see you, but like they just can't. They're not interested in like a challenge like that. Like they're more interested in manipulating. There's easy pickings, right? So they don't as much go for the tough challenges that way generally because it's too risky. They're very like protective, whereas the positive side, they'll take risks to do good work. They'll challenge themselves differently. On the negative side, it's a different thing. Yeah, I could play guitar. Mighty Thor. Yeah. I'm not great at guitar, but Dina says, oh, in Bristol. Cool. I've never been there. South Jersey. 1 hour from Gatlinburg. Cool. Elizabeth Stubbs says, how do you not have more followers? Your words resonate. Blessing to your calm and loving spirit from mine. Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I think the right amount of people will hear. I don't worry too much about it myself. What is my master Ka always told me, and Ross says this as well, I think, in Law of One somewhere, forget you the counting. I'm basically, part of my learning is to like not worry about that too much. Because I feel somewhat the same. Like, I feel like I have a good perspective and more people should listen. I do feel like that a little bit. And that's just being honest. I feel like I bring value, but at the same time, I don't have an expectation that my words should be listened to, right? If that makes sense? Like, I am just a person bringing through what I feel, and I trust the universe to bring it to where it needs to go, sort of, is where I sit with that. But I appreciate the kindness. It's a kind thing to say. Thank you. E says, I was actually referring back to the first message I had in the chat, but you're right, it may not even matter. I didn't see that. I didn't see that. But yeah, I think it's interesting to notice that it doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. It's important to like note it. I often say things like, and I got this from Michael Murdad, so I'm total thief, but honor the illusion, or respect the illusion, but honor the truth. Like, know the truth, but participate in the illusion, in a balanced way. That's what we try to advocate for here, I think. Let Us Create Harmony says, I'm actually hoping to visit my cousin. Oh, awesome. Dina says, I wish there were more like-minded people here. Yeah. It's hard to find like-minded people. Oh, hello, Wizard. Mark Jones says, you're right on. Thank you. You're right on. Dina says, I found you 2 years ago. You're one of the few truther channels I've stayed with. Oh, I'm not sure. What's a truther? I don't know what that sounds interesting. I think, is that like people that are like into like conspiracy theories and stuff? That stuff's fun. I really like it. I like all of the intriguing thoughts that we all have, and how we if we notice that reality itself, like in duality, is sort of a walking, moving metaphor, a walking, moving symbol of things, we can get some pretty interesting experiences when we're even just like watching the news. We can get these like profound kind of memories as well of our old past lives, where like, oh, that happened to me. That's like where you start to heal things. But truth seeker, speaking your truth with ascension. Okay, thank you. Truther. Cool. Yeah, I do tend to call myself a seeker of truth. That tends to be, I have a tattoo on my arm. That's the sword of truth. Tends to inspire me forward. It's tough though. It's frustrating, I think, a little bit, because there's a lot of strange things that are taught by spiritual people. And on one hand, it's great because it's those strange things that confuse us and eventually cause discord, which helps us realize. So it's like it's generally like required to have people be quite confused about what they are and what they're supposed to be doing. And, you know, when we awaken into fourth density, we start to see the world entirely differently. And then there's, you know, and this is possible for any human being. So it's important to remember that to awaken into the fourth density, then there's a lot of confusion, and that confusion can last for like years and years. And it's generally like all perfect and, you know, but when I'm watching some stuff or reading some things, and I'm like, oh man, like people are still pretty confused. It seems like a tall order to try and help with that. So I try not to bear the weight of it. I try to just figure it out for myself, and then if I figure it out, then I should be able to speak it. I've realized though, actually, we can only speak to a certain degree of truth. We can't really pass through a certain veiling of language in the physical illusion. We're not able to. It's really interesting. But if I'm with someone, I might be able to put my hand on them and share something more. So, oh, you wanted to? Thank you, Chali. Chali. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Truther is what I call anything other than media lies. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think I've heard someone use the word before, but like some of the slang terms and things I don't necessarily figure out what they all mean, but I presumed it, and I've heard people make fun of that term too. Like, so it makes sense that that's what it is. Yeah, it makes sense. It's funny. It's funny how people make fun of people who are trying to seek the truth. It's weird. It's weird to me. Like, isn't it? What else would there be worth seeking? Like, you want to seek lies? Like, what's going on? What's going on? Ooh, E says it's like Star Wars, seemingly the fourth dimensional battle, a battle for your heart. My truth versus your truth, and ours versus theirs. It is exactly like Star Wars. It's mentioned in the Law of One, actually. They say something, I'm paraphrasing a lot, but they say it something along the lines of Star Wars is to the actual reality as like a children's fantasy tale is to a real reality. Like it is a depiction of this battle. That's what inspired it. Like, a lot of the forces of light are oriented to disclosing what's occurring, because the forces of darkness are secretive and not wanting to people to know what's going on. So the forces of light are more and more oriented to saying, here's what's happening. And a lot of times it's sort of done in ways that you wouldn't think, like preparing the consciousness of humanity to understand that there's this happening, that Star Wars, like, you know, also the way the imagination works. I wanted to do a whole stream on this, and I probably will, but imagination is creation. If you read Neville Goddard, he's great with this. But whatever we imagine is created. If it's imagined and put enough investment of emotion into it, it will become a thing in the world. So for George Lucas to dream up Star Wars means it is occurring. It's occurred, occurring, or going to occur for it to exist. So when you're reading books, when you're watching movies, there isn't really such a thing as fantasy unless we say everything is fantasy, which we could say that, and I often, like, that's illusion. So it's all illusion, it's all a dream, really. A dream of the creator dreaming through varied dreamers, right? That's what everything is. So it's really a good way to try to frame things. Dina says, yes, I gave up religion years ago. Oh, let us create harmony. My name's Dana, by the way. Okay. Hello, Dana. Um, gave up religion many years ago, being raised Baptist as a child. Yeah. Here in my southern area, ascension's not talked about. Yeah, yeah, it's not really talked about around me either. Um, generally, it's like it's weird. It's actually, I've noticed this. It's strange how most of us don't have a good group. Like some of us do, and I'm hopeful that people do, but a lot of us don't seem to have a physical group of people that are like doing this, and they don't understand, right? um, so yeah, so I think that's a good time probably to end. Um, oh, I wanted to offer though too. There's an interesting movie that you guys might like. Uh, it's called the Adjustment Bureau. This is this was offered in Disclosure 5. They talked about this movie, about how it's like it's similar to what TLS does. Like one of the examples is like she might spill coffee on someone to make sure that they don't make it to like a certain place on time or something like that, so that it causes this chain of events to help in some way. And the TLS agent doesn't necessarily understand what they're participating in. So the question starts to become, and this is my question, is just if they don't know what they're doing and why they're doing it, it's just blind faith on this entity that's given them the direction, right? And you know, of course, I don't know their experience, so I don't know what they've experienced with their leaders and such. But the question is there, right? What are they interrupting and why? And what 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 is that about? It's very mysterious, very interesting to think about it. And you know, it's a really really interesting movie as well. And you know, it's kind of a good love story as well. And it's funny, I think. That like I shouldn't I won't spoil it, but it's a good story, good movie. Thank you guys so much. Sarah says, I think it's really important to not blindly accept that any entity that connects to us is benevolent. It's important to question where and why they are here, or where and why they are where they are, if their form has regressed. Oh, I see. Yeah, I think I see what you mean. Um, it's absolutely important to not blindly accept. You know, I often tell people this, and it's a good point to remind. Negative entities don't actually tend to appear negative. They don't tend to seem negative. They are alluring, attractive, magnificent in different ways. Like they tend to be radiant in their own way. If we are sensitive to auras, we might notice a red or orangish hue to them, a bright, kind of fiery type of color to them, and we'll sense their power. And we'll, you know, depending on where we're at, that can confuse us. So yeah, it's really important to hail them in the name of the One, and to ask what their business is. If we didn't call them, right? If we don't have conscious awareness of calling them, then who are they, and why have they come to our home? Yeah, it's not like a defensive thing. It's not like a creepy thing. It's just like, also a lot of these entities are, you know, they tend to, if you engage with them to speak, and you're not afraid and you're not worried about things, they tend to just leave, right? But sometimes in their attempts to manipulate, you understand a lot more about how negative polarity works. And if you can see it as it's a part of myself trying to manipulate me. Interesting. Now, of course, in the illusion, that's not the case. So ostensibly, another entity's come to manipulate me. But I can't be manipulated, really. All I can do is agree to do what another entity has suggested. I can't actually, they can't actually make me. On the spiritual side, and in the physical expression, beings will physically do things, of course, right? But at a certain point, that becomes also not really possible. You know, that's further in advancement, of course, probably. I don't know. But someone like myself, I just seem to get quite lucky with, like, even when things happen, it's just lucky. It's like, it could have been much worse, could have been much different. and you know, I just remember even when I was a kid, like, there were multiple things that happened that were pretty bad, but they could have been so much worse. If anything was slightly worse, it would have been a different story. It's sort of like we're protected, right? Start to notice, at least in my experience, I noticed that there's a protection that's been there. And it's myself protecting myself, basically, is how I see that. But yeah, okay. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time. I hope everyone has an amazing day. It's a rainy day today, but here anyway. I guess it's not probably raining where you are, but you know. Thank you so much. Appreciate all your time. Soli Deo Gloria.